Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Green Socialist Podcast. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was the Green Party candidate for president in 2020, but we're continuing to advance that platform we ran on. We were going to have a guest today, Dominique Faison, who's running for the New Jersey State Legislature, but something came up, and so we hope to have her on a future broadcast. But I wanted to remember today, it was 15 years ago yesterday, that Mary Buchen passed, who had such enormous influence on the radical ecology movement, the early Green Party. You know, it was 70 years ago when he started connecting the social question of justice and freedom to the environmental question, the environmental crisis. He wrote essays back in the early 50s on the problems of chemicals in food. And then he wrote a book, I think it was 1962, called Our Synthetic Environment, which came out before Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. Covered a lot of the same ground, although more than pesticides, he covered other toxics and nuclear power issues, and had a much more radical perspective on, what we should do about it. I mean, he always used to say, this is how he connected the social and environmental questions. In order to reharmonize humanity with nature, we've got to reharmonize human with human. And for him, it was more than just class exploitation, which, Marxism had emphasized as he came up. I mean, he was basically born under one side of his family were Bolsheviks, the other side were socialist revolutionaries out of the Russian Revolution. Then he was a young pioneer like the Boy Scouts for the Communist Party in the Bronx back in the 20s and 30s. And then he became a Trotskyist and eventually a more libertarian socialist. And so he had come up in that movement, but by saying it wasn't just class, it was hierarchy and domination. And that brought in the questions of the domination of women by men and one ethnic group by another. And so he was intersectional way before that word was even invented. And the thing I think particularly relevant for Greens today was his approach to local politics where we can have a big influence. And that was to emphasize grassroots democracy, direct democracy, and citizen assemblies, what we sometimes call people's assemblies, and then having representatives or delegates really of those assemblies go to city councils so that the power was really at the grassroots and everybody could participate. And then bringing the economy under the administration of that direct democracy as well as the politics. So I get a lot of questions about Murray Bookchin. I did work with him quite a bit in the 80s. I knew him from about really the first Seabrook occupation. I actually had him come to a rally that was post-occupation. That was 1977, the big one, where 1,414 of us were arrested. And that was his introduction to the Clamshell Alliance, which he became involved in. He was living in New Jersey at the time, wasn't aware that we were about to occupy the Seabrook nuclear power plant site and put the anti-nuclear movement on the map. So, and then ironically, where Murray Bookchin's ideas have taken the most foothold is in the Rojava region, the Kurdish region in northeast Syria, where they're trying to implement his ideas. And the Kurdish Radicals there have a program that is grassroots democratic, or they call it democratic confederalism, feminist, women have equal say in leadership bodies. It's anti-sectarian and anti-nationalist. They're really not looking for a nation state, but autonomy for the grassroots democracy they're building. It's ecologist, it's socialist. It's really the best example of a secular left movement in the Middle East. They're not perfect. They did come out of a, traditional kind of Stalinist national liberation movement to these new politics, and maybe haven't completely abandoned their politics, particularly because they're fighting wars against the jihadis and the Turks and the Assad. So they're in a difficult situation, but ironically, they're the ones that, took a lot of their ideas from Murray Bookchin. So his ideas live on. The other person I'm thinking about today is Glenn Ford, who was the managing editor. I'm not sure what his title was. He was the principal. He did the most writing for Black Agenda Report for years. And he just passed away a day or two ago. And we're going to miss him because he's one of the sharpest analysts of American politics that was around. And if you should go online and just listen to him. He's a model of how to get very clear on what's going on and how to present it. So he's going to be missed. So what I've been thinking about, what kind of provoked it, is an article in the really left liberal journal, American Prospect. It's online now, called How Joe Biden Defanged the Left. And what it does is talk about how, unlike the Obama administration, which kind of kept the left away and had Rahm Emanuel scolding them all the time, the progressives, the left liberals, Ron Klain, on behalf of Biden, has them, meeting with them every Thursday, by Zoom, sometimes in the White House. And these groups seem to have accepted access without influence and are happy with that. So they hobnob with Democratic Party elites, but they aren't making real demands. And so here we are. Congress is, the House is just going on a 7-week vacation. Voting rights, climate, immigration, DACA, $15 minimum wage, PRO Act, Equality Act, judicial reform, police reform, all these reforms that the Democrats, DC statehood, said they would pass if they got control of both houses in the presidency, and they haven't. And these left liberal groups just seem to be happy to have access. And Biden's not feeling the heat from them. Remember the last open letter telling people not to vote for the Green ticket, vote for Biden, and not just in the battleground states. They called that the safe state strategy. Now it was the no state strategy. Vote for Biden everywhere, which enables Biden to take his left for granted. So the title of that last open letter was Dump Trump, Then Battle Biden. And I've said, that really means begging Biden, because there's no threat of, leaving the Democratic Party so they don't have to pay attention to these progressives. But it's worse than I thought. People should look that article up, How Joe Biden Defanged the Left. So here we are. The eviction moratorium expires tonight at midnight. And the landlords that want to evict people have already started. Zillow, the real estate online resource, estimates that 7.5 million people are facing eviction. There are about 15 million people substantially behind on rent. And Congress, just left. The House just left for 7 weeks. So none of this stuff is going to get done. Biden could have got this moratorium was done by the Center for Disease Control. Biden, that's executive branch, he could have told him extend it. Instead, he asked Congress to pass a law a couple days ago. I mean, come on. Congress can't move that fast. It's not moving on anything else either. So, and it turns out the reporting today is there are a lot of those House Democrats dependent on real estate money that didn't want to do that. They want the evictions to go forward. So we're facing a real crisis now. We have a lot of homelessness that's going to increase. And then we got the two other major supports for people that have been hurt by this COVID lockdown. Unemployment insurance expires in September, beginning of September, and the moratorium on students required who have student loans, those they got to start making the full payments again at the end of September. And we're up to $1.7 trillion in debt, and there's been no relief for them, just a postponement. So that's what we got from these two major parties. Everybody can see the Republicans attacking people's ability to vote, and where they control legislatures, bringing the control over who determines who won an election right into those Republican-controlled legislatures. And the Democrats are on the high horse about that. They can't get voting rights passed, or they can't end partisan gerrymandering, which is in this For the People Act. And that's going to give the Republicans 15 or 20 seats just on its own, which means they're going to take back the House in 2022. And the Democrats just went on vacation. So anyway, that's why we need another party, the Green Party. So that's what's on my mind, and I'm happy to take questions. Z-Manny, or Z-Money, was the inside-outside strategy ever real? Or was it always a ruse to draw more progressives to support the Dems' corporate leadership? Well, I think some people, it wasn't a ruse, they really believed it. But this has been around forever. There were people coming out of the Rainbow Coalition. They said they'd be inside the Democratic Party for the Rainbow Coalition. Then they take it outside and have a Rainbow Party. Well, Jesse Jackson put an end to that when he made it part of his Operation Push and just run by himself from the top down. But the logic of that, to be inside, you've got to support all the Democrats when an election comes. I remember when I was running for governor in 2018, and AOC won her surprise victory in the primary in June. Was it June? No, back then it was September. And then, after she'd won that, Cuomo won his primary against Cynthia Nixon. And she went right on CNN and she said, I'm supporting the whole Democratic ticket, including Andrew Cuomo, a corporate Democrat if there ever was one. And that's what she's got to do, or they will sanction her. She won't have access to, in Congress, they can take committee assignments from her. They can deny her access to, staffing and funding. There are all kinds of sanctions. So in order to be accepted inside, you got to play along. Bernie Sanders had to pledge that he would support the Democratic nominee in 2016, which everybody thought would be Hillary Clinton, including Bernie Sanders, before they would let him onto the ballots and into the debates and those primaries. So that's how it works. So I think the logic is, if you want to be inside and outside, and the idea there is sometimes you run outside the Democratic Party, sometimes you run inside. But as I watched that evolve post-Rainbow, the guy that used to run, he's passed on now, the Progressive Democrats of America, said inside was running as a Democrat, outside was doing street demonstrations, usually aimed at Democrats, who, if you don't threaten to, take your vote somewhere else, means they can take you for granted. So I think it's always been a dead-end strategy. I actually wrote an article about it for New Politics back in the 90s that may be in the archive if it goes back that far, online archive. But now the inside-outside strategy always ends up inside. That's been my observation. Miss Leo, do you think cryptocurrency is a big scam to basically finish off the working classes? Cryptocurrency is fake invisible money, and if the internet ends, only those with valuables will survive. I think cryptocurrency is a way for people to get around basically regulations and laws, because it's hard to track. It's good for criminals and people that want to avoid taxes. And there's movement to ban it as a legitimate means of payment. I think that's a good idea. And plus, you got the environmental problem of it takes, however they formulate its blockchain to, make it so the transactions are recorded, but I think, you can't. They're anonymous, but how the transactions happened are accessible, if I got that right. But in any case, it takes enormous amount of energy to run the computers. We have a coal plant about 60 miles west of here that shut down. And now they want to reopen it in order to have what they call a Bitcoin mining operation there because they need the energy. So it's not only a way to avoid legal responsibilities and taxes, it's an environmental disaster. So I think cryptocurrency, and I believe the head of the Fed, or maybe Janet Yellen, who's head of the Treasury now, has recommended that we ban cryptocurrencies. I'm not sure if I got that right, but I know that people in Washington, like maybe Elizabeth Warren, have also suggested that. So I think cryptocurrencies, we don't need them. Living in furnace, Rojava hasn't really shirked capitalism. Well, they have cooperatives, they have municipal services, but have they overthrown capitalism and got rid of all capitalist social relations in their region? No, I don't think so. Shirked, I'm not sure that's the right way. But their public ideology is they want to go to a cooperative socialist economy. And they are making moves in that direction. And I think we need to give them credit for that. I don't know anybody else in that region that's trying to do that. Certainly not the sheikdoms or the autocracies like Modi's in Egypt or Assad's in Syria. They are capitalists to the core. So, I think we should support these folks in the effort they're trying to make in very difficult circumstances. Scout Trooper 164, Howie, what do you think of workers at Disney and Frito-Lay, as well as miners in Alabama going on strike? Well, I think it's good when workers fight back. Strikes, have to be well organized. They're not lightly undertaken because you lose your regular income. So they're the kind of thing that you don't want to do until you're ready to see them through and win. And, I wish them the best. Strikes are down in this country, at least as recognized by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, although there's other people like the Payday Report that has been documenting this, saying actually strikes are going up. So, I'm not sure how that sorts out, but when workers are ready and willing to strike, we should support them. I was in the Teamsters for many years, and the good things in the contracts I had were achieved by the strike in 1997, which is probably the most successful strike from the 70s maybe until this today. And we never prepared for another strike, and every 5 years we had a contract negotiation. And I think that weakened our bargaining position. And it really had to be organized. But old Jimmy Hoffa Jr. Didn't want to go on strike and didn't want to do that kind of confrontation with UPS. So I'm just saying I benefited from a strike that was well organized before Jimmy Hoffa Jr. got back into the presidency of the Teamsters. What do I think of Joe Biden saying socialism is sustainable? Joe Biden's capitalism is not sustainable. Let's start there. Socialism at least gives you the economic democracy in which you have the power to choose sustainable technologies and economic practices. Joe Biden that's just, old school anti-socialist rhetoric. And he's not the sharpest knife in the drawer. I really don't think he has a clue what socialism means. A lot of people like him think socialism is when the government does it. Capitalism is when the private sector does it. The idea that it means economic democracy probably never crossed his mind because living in the elite circles he's lived in for decades, he's probably never even really talked to a real socialist. So I don't think he knows what the hell he's talking about. Amy L. Sachs, Howie, have you seen the legal suit Sherry Honkala and the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign brought in Philly to assist homeless folks. And as the National Green Party considered pushing for similar. Will Sherry Honkala appear on this show? Yeah, Sherry would make a good guest. And now that we're going into a worse crisis of evictions and homelessness, it would be timely. So I think we should do that. I'm not familiar with the lawsuit, but I'm sure there's good reason. I've been at some of her actions down there in Philly, and the power structure there really doesn't give a damn about homeless folks. And the work that Sherry does with the homeless is the kind of work we should all be doing in all our cities with the homeless. So I'll have to look into what she's done, and I think that's a great suggestion for a guest, and particularly timely now. Russell Fedorka. Howie, can you explain what I heard, that there is a anti-third party policies in the PRO Act? Thoughts on what we can do? Thanks for your efforts. I'm not familiar with any anti-third party policies in the PRO Act. We have been critical of the For the People Act's public campaign financing provisions, which raised the bars so high that Green Party candidates are going to have a very difficult time reaching them to get the presidential primary matching funds. And now it's matching funds through the whole election, not just for the primaries. They've increased the threshold 5 times. So instead of $5,000 in 20 states, we'd have to raise $25,000 in 20 states from small contributions, and actually smaller contributions, 200 or less instead of 250 or less. Which for the Green Party, which doesn't have, massive small donor mailing lists like the Democrats and Republicans have developed, is a real challenge. And then they have a provision for congressional House candidates. They have to raise $50,000 to qualify. And Mike Feinstein and I looked at the FEC records of, I think it's 594 Green Party candidates for the House since the 90s. And we could only find one for sure and maybe 2 or 3 others that raised $50,000 or more in small donations. Most of, and they're not that many, but we did have some candidates raise over $50,000, but a lot of them were people that had a lot of means themselves and a lot of friends with means. So a lot of their donations are much higher than the typical Green campaign. So what the For the People Act does is sort of exclude the Green Party from their public campaign financing proposal. Now, I think where that's at is they're going to come back with a For the People Act that is much pared down. And one of the things they're excluding is the public campaign financing, because a lot of Democrats, as well as almost all the Republicans, don't want public campaign financing. They want to be able to go to the private money, which it's how they got elected. That's who they really answer to, their donors, not their voters. And they want to keep that system the same. So I think that's where that's at. The PRO Act is about helping people organize unions with things like card check, where if a majority of people in a bargaining unit sign a card saying they want the union to be to represent them in bargaining, you automatically go to bargaining. And if the company doesn't respond and bargain in good faith, you can start an arbitration process that forces them to deal with you. And it has a number of other labor law reforms in it. So if there's something in the PRO Act that's anti-third party, I have not heard about it. Zimani, Howie, how important is the media issue for you? The media industry starves you for exposure, and then Dems exploit public interest to attack the Greens more easily. Democratize media. Well, I think, it's an important issue for me, and the solution is to democratize media. We were totally blanked out, not just by the corporate media, but by the so-called progressive independent media in 2020. And I'll give you one example. which, really irritates me. We are fighting for ballot access in Wisconsin. And the Democratic Party is putting out press releases saying the absentee ballots are already printed and mailed out. So the Greens are too late. And the Supreme Court of Wisconsin says, oh, let's ask the local boards of election if they've done that. Well, they gave them a week to do that, bringing them right up to the deadline to get the absentee ballots out. Meanwhile, the Milwaukee Sentinel-Journal, they started calling around, and they found out in a day that the Democratic press releases were nonsense, that they had not been printed, they had not been mailed out. And that was printed within a day by the Milwaukee Sentinel-Journal, the biggest paper in the state. But the Supreme Court sat on our challenge to our being knocked off the ballot. And then a day or two before the absentee ballots had to be mailed out, they decided they would make the decision on that case, even though they had all the paperwork there more than a week. And they decided that we can't consider the facts in the law because it's too late and the absentee ballots have to go out. So Greens, you're out of luck. So they didn't consider the merits of our case, which are really strong. So, and then Rachel Maddow, she has a story saying we're a Republican op, and because we did have to get Republican lawyers, all the progressive and Democratic lawyers wouldn't take our case. So you got to go to court, you got to have counsel. So we got some Republican lawyers, and so they use that to say, this was a Republican operation, as if, we don't have our own mind and don't want to get our own candidates on the ballot. And same day, Amy Goodman at Democracy Now! Basically did, not quite as harshly as Rachel Maddow, but basically said what the Democratic press releases were saying, that the ballots had been mailed out, already printed. It wasn't true. And the next day is when the Milwaukee Sentinel-Journal put that out, and it was not corrected by Rachel Maddow or Democracy Now! So you say the Dems exploit public ignorance to attack the Greens more easily? They exploit lazy journalists or journalists with bias to attack the Greens more easily. That's the case of what I just described. So what's the solution? I think we need to have public support for independent journalism. So that means in New Jersey has an experimental program in this. The government pays for this journalism, and they don't do this in New Jersey, but this is what I recommend. And you have the boards that govern how that money is allocated to these independent investigative journalists. Select that board by lot. Don't have them appointed by politicians. Don't have elections. Selected by lot, like we do juries. And then you'll get a sample of everybody, of the people. And then they can make the decisions on allocations. So it's not state media, it's not corporate media, it's independent public media that the people have a real say in. And I think we need things like that. So I think the other thing we need to do is bring back some of the rules we used to have under the Federal Communications Act that barred cross-ownership and monopolization of media. The Telecommunications Act of 1994, another gift, quote unquote, to us from the Clinton administration, from the corporate Democrats, got rid of a lot of those restrictions. So now you have, in some towns, like town of Syracuse, city of Syracuse, one or two media organizations owns all the media, the newspaper, the radio stations, the TV stations. And, so we got one of the stations that own, or one of the media organizations that owns a lot of the radio here is Clear Channels. They got country, they got news, they got R&B, they got it all. And of course, they're a right-wing outfit with, a news that is, spun to the right. So we've got to have a lot of independently owned media organizations that operate and compete with each other. So you have multiple independent ownership of TV and radio and print in your communities. And instead of having these national networks that dominate the media. It's you say 6 corporations. Lately, I've been hearing 5 own 90% of all outlets. And it's not only news, it's entertainment, it's culture. And it's a real problem because they basically define what we can see. So we need a lot more local independent ownership and public media that is independent of both the state and the corporations. And then we got the problem of these internet platforms where, once they're network platforms, once they get a critical mass of people and information on them, everybody wants to be on them. That's what Amazon is. That's what Facebook is. That's what Twitter is. And if they're going to be monopolies, and these network platforms tend toward monopolization, maybe they should be publicly owned as public utilities to serve the public and not their shareholders. And that's another case where you might want their boards governed by people chosen by lot rather than by elections or appointed by political officials. So that's a big area, and it's important. So thanks for bringing it up. Eric Gray, in your opinion, Howie, what is the best way to explain the current housing crisis and other failures of capitalism to students? Eric's always wanting to know how you tell the students. He must be a teacher. Well, I think, in the case of housing, when has the private housing market ever provided affordable housing to everybody who needs it? It never has. Because what do landlords and developers want? They want to maximize profits. And they can make more money by orienting their business to upscale markets than people who are struggling. Yeah, Eric is a teacher. I thought so. I think he may have said so on one of these programs. And so, so that you start with that fact, that the private housing market doesn't provide affordable housing to everybody that needs it. And then maybe you go to where they might have provided it. I think they're European countries with a high ratio of public and cooperative housing that is so high that the private market has to meet the prices that the public and cooperative markets can provide, the nonprofit markets can provide. So I think in Vienna, Austria, 60% of the housing stock is either social, they call it social over there, public, or cooperative. And because their rents are based on costs, not cost plus profits, the private market has to bring their prices, make their prices competitive in order to get tenants, which means housing in Vienna is pretty affordable. And that's just one of many cities in Europe where they do that. So I think, there's an example of the provision of housing, not by capitalist means, but by basically socialist means, shows you can have affordable housing. So I would compare those two. And the other failures of capitalism, I don't know where to begin. I think one that particularly appeals to students today is they are concerned with the environment and with the climate crisis. And capitalism is a system that's structured around endless growth, endless accumulation of profits and capital. And that's not compatible with a sustainable economy, with a finite earth. So that's a fundamental problem of capitalism. And I think that's a failure of capitalism that will appeal to today's students. And then you can talk about socialism being, supposed to be a system of economic democracy where we, the people, can make the choices on technologies and production levels. We can choose to make goods repairable and recyclable, require manufacturers to take back used up or worn out goods rather than have them head for waste dumps. So that's one incentive for a zero waste economy. Those kinds of things we can decide to do if the economy is democratically managed through social ownership and democratic administration, or in other words, socialism. So I think that's another failure of capitalism that you might get students' ears on, because the environmental crisis is, these young folks get it, their future is in jeopardy and they're not happy about it. Scout Trooper 164, if Trump were to run again, do you think it will be overwhelmingly easy if Harris was his opponent? No, Trump is, Jesus, Trump is so easy to shoot down. He's a liar. He doesn't know the issues. All he can do is insult people like a spoiled brat. I mean, he'd be easy to debate. I don't know if Harris is up to it, though. Biden, I don't think, did well. He kind of took Trump's bait and got into the gutter with him on these insults. So, the debates is one thing. The people behind Trump are a minority of the country. The problem is the Republicans, through these voter suppression laws and laws to basically rig elections in Republican-controlled state legislatures, they're taking the power to certify elections away from independently elected secretaries of state and county boards of election. In Georgia, they passed that law. Now they're trying to take away the power of the Fulton County Board of Election, which is Atlanta, because they didn't vote for Trump or the Republicans. That kind of stuff. And then there's the partisan gerrymandering. So that's what enables the Republicans as a minority to have disproportionate power. Plus, we have anti-majoritarian federal election institutions like the U.S. Senate, where Wyoming gets 2 senators and California gets 2 senators. But when you compare the populations, a Wyoming voter has 40 times more power in electing senators than a Californian. And of course, the Electoral College, again, where you add those 2 electoral votes for each 2 as Senate, it skews it toward the Republican areas that tend to be white, rural, and conservative. And they overwhelm the majority of America, which is urban, cosmopolitan, and multiracial. And so that gives Trump or whoever the Republican is a shot. Plus, if they're able to get a lot of these laws passed in Republican-controlled states and they start fixing elections at the state level, they're going to go to Congress and they're going to try to do what they tried to do this year on January 6th in 2024. And that is Biden or Harris or whoever could win the presidential election, win the most states, enough electoral votes. And the people in Congress, the Republicans in Congress, could say, we don't recognize that and decertify. And if they have a majority, like they may get after I talked about earlier, to take back the House, they could take back the Senate, they could steal the election in 2024 for president. So I don't think it'll be easy, whether it's Harris or even Bernie Sanders or Biden. So, we gotta prevent the Republicans from, doing what they're doing in the states. That means the For the People Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. There's another piece of legislation that would explicitly prevent meddling with election counts and certification. All that stuff's got to pass. The problem is Biden and a bunch of senators, it's not just Manchin and Sinema, don't want to get rid of the filibuster or even reform it just for voting rights legislation. Stop the filibuster for that so we can get this legislation passed. The reporting we're seeing, I mentioned this last week, is New York Times had a story. Reporters were talking to people in the administration. Their plan is to just out-mobilize the Republicans despite these voter suppression laws, which make it harder for Democratic constituents, particularly people of color, young people, disabled people, to vote. And yes, you can mobilize and overcome that, but how are you going to overcome the gerrymandering? And how are you going to overcome in states where the Republicans have taken the power to the legislature that they control to decide who won the election in their state? So I think we can't count on the Democrats either. So I think a major theme for, Greens going forward, we got the Green New Deal, we got the Economic Bill of Rights, we got peace initiatives to deal with this new nuclear arms race. We got to make democracy demands one of our top 4 issues as well. Rob E. Rich, 6 million people facing evictions. Can we seize vacant houses and open more public houses as a state of emergency? Well, that's what Sherry Hockler was doing for homeless people in Philadelphia. And we can demand that our cities open more public houses as a state of emergency. A lot of these hotels are not being filled in this COVID crisis. That's one place. And there are a lot of buildings that are, homes and, the hotels that are unoccupied. So, we can do that as an emergency measure right now. And it's just a matter of getting cities to do it. Now, they'll plead they don't have the finances. And because they statutorily have to balance their budgets, they do have fiscal constraints. But I think that's one place where, defund the police comes in. We can take some of that money from some of these over budgeted police departments and put it into housing so that police officers are not out there, writing vagrancy tickets for homeless people, but housing people are out there getting homeless people homes. So these are the kinds of things we got to be doing, and it's going to get worse now real quick with this eviction moratorium ending at midnight tonight. Linda Hand. Final 5 primaries are being pushed as a way to limit competition in the general election to well-funded candidates. You got that right. That's a push we're getting from political elites, well-funded elites. They got top 2 primary in California, Washington, Louisiana. And what you often get is in a majority Republican district, 2 Republicans, a majority Democratic district, 2 Democrats going on to the general election. And those, in fact, Alaska has they do top 4. So they have a plurality vote to get the top 4. Then in the general election, they use ranked choice voting, which kind of undermines one of the points of ranked choice voting is you should be able to vote for who you want. That's part of voting rights too. And instead, you eliminate, upstart small third parties, like the Green Party is really in Alaska. So it'd be very difficult for Greens to get past the top 4 in Alaska. And the final 5 thing, same principle that's being pushed. Chuck Schumer here in New York, who's, the leader in the U.S. Senate, has been pushing top 2. Not with a lot of luck in New York, but it's coming from people like him who are well funded by Wall Street and those kind of folks. So, yeah, we gotta stop that. Let's have ranked choice voting for single offices, and when we talk about legislatures, let's have ranked choice voting for multi-member districts, which gets you proportional representation. So, I like to point this out for the Greens in Australia. It's a good case in point for us to remember. They have single seat ranked choice voting for their House of Representatives. And the Greens are a 10% party. They get 10.2, 10.4% of the vote in first choices across the country. And the House of Representatives in Australia is 151 seats. The Greens only have 1 of those seats, even though they got 10% of the first ranks in across the country for the House. The Senate, on the other hand, is proportional representation. It's multi-seat ranked choice voting. And so the Greens have 9 out of 76 senators, which is actually a little more than 10%, but it's pretty close. So if we get ranked choice voting in single member districts that are still winner take all, not much changes from plurality voting. That's why it's so important to push for, in this ranked choice voting movement, proportional representation on legislatures through multi-member ranked choice voting. Dolores Kelsey, people on SSI have a $2,000 asset limit, $2,000 asset limit. In 1974, the limit was $1,500. That 1974 limit would equal about $8,266 today. Why can't the poorest of the poor save more? Because the neoliberal people that push public austerity have decided they really want the poor to be so dirt poor and politically weak. What you're describing is a travesty. Welfare benefits have gone down. The minimum wage has not increased. It's gone down from what it was in 1974 considerably. It's just we've had political leadership that answers to what big business wants. They want people so desperate that they'll take a job that hardly pays enough to live on, if that. And then people on SSI who, can't work, and asset limit, you basically got to get rid of everything you got before you can qualify. And that doesn't help people. It helps them become poor. So, but your question is why? And it's because the political leadership and the big fat cats behind them want the poor people to be so damn dirt poor they can't fight back. Lee Shoron, do you think Trump is as bad as Nixon was? Trump is worse. I mean, he's more of the open racist. Nixon was racist as could be, but he was like sort of civilized enough not to say it to people's faces. Trump is just unbelievable. Plus, Nixon's allies were, he appealed to voters' racist instincts with his Southern strategy and his code words, law and order and everything. Trump's allies are stone cold, racist organizations, the far, far right. And so I think Trump is worse. He's more of an authoritarian. Nixon's instinct was, if the left has movements we had in the 60s and McGovern's going to run against me, I'll co-opt some of his programs. So Nixon had a public jobs program. He got ground troops out of Vietnam by Vietnamizing the war, and then coming up with the Paris Peace Accords that basically he knew he couldn't win in Vietnam. He was smart enough to realize that. So he just wanted a decent interval. That's what they called it before the North Vietnamese and the communists took over all of Vietnam. So Nixon was very different. Trump's instinct is to just not even listen to other people, not compromise, and double down on the far, far right. So, and Trump is a much bigger crook. I mean, Nixon was crooked, and back then it was, cash money for CREEP, the Committee to Reelect the President. Its acronym was CREEP. From foreign entities as well as, domestic entities. But Trump's whole career was corruption, not paying his contractors, evading taxes. And it's going to come out as he gets prosecuted finally, bank fraud, insurance fraud, tax fraud. The guy was a gangster. So, yeah, I think Trump is worse. Dorothy McKee, didn't Nixon sabotage Vietnam peace talks under LBJ? And it cost the peace talks for another few years loss of over 25,000 lives. That would be the American troops lost. A lot more Vietnamese were lost. Yeah, Nixon committed treason. He sabotaged. LBJ said, I'm going to negotiate with North Vietnamese. And Nixon had, I forget the lady's name. I think she was Taiwanese, right-wing Chinese nationalist, Madam somebody. Anyway, she was told to give the message to DM, don't come to an agreement with the North. Wait for Nixon to come in, and he'll give you more backing than LBJ. So what Nixon was doing was undermining the president of the United States in U.S. foreign policy. And that's treasonous. It's against the law. But he got away with it. It's now documented. But yeah, I still think Trump is worse. But Nixon was bad. I won't argue with that. Yeah, that woman whose name I'm not remember was married to a former U.S. general. Scout Trooper 164. Howie, how do you think the Greens in the Deep South could help people living there come and vote for or join them? Asking, since it's mainly held by Republicans who are extremists. Yeah, and particularly where the Republicans are strong in the rural areas, the Democrats are absent. So the Greens can come. They're progressive people living out there. We can begin to organize them. And then you go in the cities. What have the Democrats done for the poor people of color, really, in terms of alleviating poverty, ending discrimination? They haven't. I'm thinking of Atlanta now, where the Democrats control the city, and mass transit stops at the city borders. And the Democrats don't call out the Republicans in the suburbs who won't let the mass transit system extend into their communities. They're pretty quiet about it. And, the Democrats, and I'm thinking of Atlanta now, the big companies there, Coca-Cola, UPS, who are some of the others? One of the airlines might be, anyway, there are a lot of big corporations headquartered in Atlanta. And they back the Democrats to be corporate Democrats. So I think there's room for the Greens to go there. But whether it's the South or anywhere else, we got to get out on the street, knock on doors, develop relationships with people, be consistently active between elections, as well as running candidates in elections. And then in some of those southern states, it's not all of them, it's hard to run. Ballot access is very difficult. Georgia is one of those. On the other hand, South Carolina, we got a ballot line. Mississippi, we got a ballot line. Louisiana, we got a ballot line. Alabama's a tough state. Florida, we got a ballot line. Tennessee and Kentucky, ballot access the petition requirements are actually some of the lowest in the country. So Greens there can get on the ballot. What other states? North Carolina is tough, but that Green Party is tough too. And they got ballot access. They're working on it right now. So, in most of those states, we can get on the ballot and give people an alternative. But we really got to build real organizations. If we're going to be a party that contests for power, we got to be a mass party. And then the masses are at the grassroots. And we've got to have an ongoing organizing campaign, what they call deep canvassing, where we go out and listen to people. Don't just preach at them. Have, conversations, develop relationships, and then, have them see us being active on issues they care about. And then we'll win over more and more people. And we got to be organized so that when these people come in, most people come into the Green Party, they don't want to sit through long business meetings, talking about, what platform we're going to use for our database. They come because they want to learn and they want to take action. And that's how you bring people in and get them involved. And those people that want to be involved in the administrative end, it's not a lot of people, but they're definitely valuable because it's got to be done. You just don't want to subject everybody to that because they're not interested in that, So you got to organize your locals so people can do what they came to do, study groups and film showings and lectures. That's the education. and then being active on the issues that people care about. That's why people will come and stay. So, and I think it's true whether it's the South, the North, or the West, or the East. Carrie Chet Campbell. There are strong Green Party campaigns around the world in Germany, France, Spain, Croatia, Estonia, and more. Which Green Party sets a good, strong campaign example for our U.S. Green Party? Well, I like the Australian Greens, who have put more of an emphasis on this deep canvassing I was just talking about. There were some articles in Jacobin about that. I don't know how most of these parties run their campaigns. So, in their election systems, they're so different. Most of those, I think every country you're talking about, except maybe France, has a proportional representation system. So the Greens get a foothold in the legislature and their parliamentary system. So the executive branch is chosen by the legislative branch, and the Greens are often coalition partners and end up administering ministries or departments. Very different than the situation we face in the United States with single member district winner take all plurality voting, which is the biggest obstacle we face. But as far as campaigns go, I would look at those articles about the Australian Greens and how they went out there and, really improved their standing by doing that kind of deep canvassing. Miss Leo, it seems like a good strategy, but people aren't incentivized to go canvass because they aren't getting paid and they're already trying to make money to survive. When they get home, they rest, not canvass. It's not easy, I'll grant you that. But who's going to pay us? Not corporate America. Now, we should be a membership party. So we have, people paying dues regularly instead of relying on people volunteering to donate now and again. That would give us a little bit more sounder financial base. And that's why we got to be a mass party. So lots of people are giving a little bit. There's no way around canvassing. There are no shortcuts. Yeah, and not everybody is up for it. Knocking on doors, talking to people. Some people have psychological blocks about that. On the other hand, other people enjoy it. They like talking to people and hearing what they got to say. So just because some people, can't do it because, work is taking too much out of them and they can't do more than what they're doing. There's still a lot of us that can and should. And those of us that can and should, there are not enough of us doing it. I've seen that going around the country. We have too many green locals that are just a small group of people. They don't have any systematic way of reaching out beyond their little circles. When they mobilize through the usual networks and they get the usual suspects. So they're not growing. And so canvassing isn't easy. Not everybody can do it, but it's got to be done. Otherwise, you're not going to connect with people. There's no other method of connecting with people that is as effective in getting people involved and also in persuading them to your politics. There's a lot of research that shows that. Wow, that hour went fast. So I'm supposed to say some parting words. Yeah, I think I did with the canvassing. I think that's something that people have to understand. If you're going to organize an alternative to these two big corporate parties, we got to build a mass party. We got to have a way of reaching people. And the two parties aren't reaching them. They aren't canvassing. They have a lot of money to advertise. They're the only two parties on the ballot in most elections. And those people that do vote, they vote for their traditional party, the party their family was born into. But the people, the biggest group every election, or most elections, the last presidential election was an exception, are the non-voters. Because they understand that it doesn't matter in these single-member winner-take-all districts, one party or the other has the majority of people, Democrats or Republicans, and they're going to win. Everybody knows they're going to win. It's like the elections aren't competitive. I mean, the studies show that 90% of House districts and 95% of state legislative districts are uncompetitive because majority of one party or the other has the voters in those districts. So the non-voters, they can see the game. And so they just stay home because it doesn't matter who you vote for. It's not going to change. That's why, we need to fight for ranked choice voting, particularly proportional representation for legislative seats, for multi-seat ranked choice voting. And then we also, to take on these two big parties that are so entrenched, we got to build a mass party. That means going out and talking to the masses. So let's get out there and organize and not let happen what's happening, which is nothing is happening to deal with these crises of climate and militarism and people in very serious economic straits. They're going to get worse with this ending of the eviction moratorium. So, we're in a crisis, and the Democrats and Republicans aren't going to get us out of it. The Green Party needs to step up. So have a good week, everybody.